It's the Weekly Show with David J. Maloney.
This week, David chats with renowned film and television star Ruta Lee.
And now, here's your host, David J. Maloney.
Welcome, everyone, to the Weekly Show. I'm your host, David J. Maloney. On tonight's show, we've got the next part of our interview with actress Ruta Lee. Ruta is one of the few people you'll ever meet who has more than one star on the various walks of fame in Hollywood. And she's worked or rubbed shoulders with some of the biggest and brightest stars to have ever graced the screen. From Fred Astaire and Audrey Hepburn to Burt Reynolds to Lucille Ball, Frank Sinatra, and the entire Rat Pack, just to name a few. There's really no end to the stories she's lived through in Hollywood. Back again with us again after the break to chat more about her career and incredible life is actress Ruta Lee. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. What do you think made that Western genre film and TV like such a special part of our culture, like at that point in time? Like, movies and television have always been some of our country's biggest exports, but to me, the Western kind of holds a special place in that group, no?
The Westerns, all of them, it wasn't shoved up your nose, but there was a morality that was displayed in every episode of every show. The bad guy got punished. The good guy was praised. Somehow kids learned that you could shoot without killing. An entirely different morality existed. And I wish that we would go back to it a little bit, because the games and everything have taken over our young kids' lives instead of pieces that were great fun to watch. The whole family could watch. The entertainment was there, and still there were subliminal lessons learned. I kind of miss that a little bit.
Yeah, no,
I miss it a lot. Never mind a little bit.
No, it's very, very true. Being a bit of a sci-fi fan and initially a lawyer by trade, I'm personally interested in your work on The Twilight Zone and Perry Mason. How did those jobs come about? Do you have any interesting stories to share about, any of your fellow actors or time on those sets?
I love doing Perry Mason because I got to play so many different roles. And why? Because the producer of the show was a beautiful actress who used her brains and her talent and her beauty and became producer of this wonderful series. And Gail Patrick was lovely to look at. And when I finally got to see all of those movies, I thought, wow. And she liked talent. You had to be gifted enough when you worked in television to work very fast. The movies were much slower. You had more time to rehearse a scene and sort of plan things. In television, a lot of it was very spontaneous, and you had to know your stuff. And producers only hired people that could bring their gift to work and not fumble lines and not be late and would come in knowing their material. And boy, she hired a lot of people over and over again. I was a lucky one. I got to do a lot of shows and a lot of very different characters. And wow, working with someone like Barbara Hale and our wonderful leading man who had the wildest sense of humor made it fun. And that whole company had a great sense of humor, which made heavy work, long work hours, so much better and easier to bear. But our producer, Gail Patrick, set the tone. I loved her and hope God is taking good care of her.
We were talking earlier about Debbie, and I wanted to ask, I mean, during the course of your friendship, I presume that you must have probably also had some sort of friendship or relationship with her daughter, Carrie. So Carrie gets booked as Princess Leia all these years later. right? Um, what was it like as a friend to Debbie watching your friend's daughter like blossom into, I mean, Princess Leia?
Debbie had problems with Carrie. I'm not telling tales out of school. This
Mm-hmm.
is known from the time she started going into her teens. And Debbie was smart enough to realize that her daughter did have a gift. She was talented. She put her into Irene with her when she went to New York and was the belle of Broadway in Irene. Her daughter was in that. Of course, there was continuous problem. And there were times, there was a long period where they didn't even speak after Broadway. And it was very difficult for Debbie. It broke my heart to see how she was suffering through. Well, my daughter is fine. She had the marriages, she had different affairs. They were quite serious. I'm talking about Carrie, of course.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Carrie found her métier, which was to get off the screen and get behind it and write. And she was a proficient and marvelous writer and a marvelous performer of her own material. And they got to talking again. Of course, Carrie had a tremendous problem with drugs and drinking, and drinking and drugs. And it looked like things would get better, and things didn't always get better. And Debbie tried very, very hard, but she was very proud of what she was able to do. When speaking of Debbie, talking about Carrie, she was always very proud of her. And it's just heartbreaking to me that she had to live through that experience of her daughter dying before her. That shouldn't have happened. And yet it did, just a couple of days. And it was a very, very difficult period for her. And she pulled herself together. She pulled the family in, what there was, and the people that were the caregivers, and saying, we all have to pull ourselves together to do this for Billy, Carrie's daughter, that beautiful Billy. And that evening, after she pulled herself together and pulled the family together, she died. So all I can do is say, they're together now. We think of them, the Thalians have a beautiful pin that we sell that is a gorgeous caricature of Debbie and her singing in the rain, raincoat, slicker, and hat, and umbrella, and with her arm around Princess Leia, and Princess Leia with her arm around, and it's from the back. And if anybody wants it, it's available. Just call us or write us at thethalians.org, and it's available.
Back to your book. Does your phone call with Nikola Khrushchev feature in the book? I mean, how does such an incredible chain of events like that happen? I mean, did it ever seem like it wasn't going to work?
Well, it seemed right from the very first call that it wasn't going to work. I mean, I had been plied with many glasses of wine trying to get me out of the doldrums about my grandmother, whose letter had come from Lithuania, and it took 6 weeks for the letter to get here. So I didn't know if the lady was alive or dead, frankly. But when I placed the call to Khrushchev, it just seemed like I had to do something very dramatic and very different, because I had tried for 12 years to get my grandmother out of Siberia, and then after she was allowed back out of Lithuania. 12 years I had been doing this. And finally I said, I'll just do the impossible. And many of your viewers will be too young to remember what a person-to-person call was. It was a telephone call that you placed, and you paid twice as much if you got your party, but you didn't pay at all if you didn't get your party. So I placed a call to Nikita Khrushchev, the Kremlin, Moscow, USSR. And our American operator said, "How do you spell Khrushchev?" Well, who the hell knew how to spell Khrushchev? But long story short, it went on for hours. And in the meantime, I was calling the Russian embassy in Washington, trying to negotiate papers and permission to go to Lithuania, where you had to be a very, very high Communist Party official to go. This was in the early 60s, in 64. Yeah. And nobody went to Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, Poland, any of those satellite countries of the Soviet. And I kept getting niet, speaking to everybody from the dishwasher to the upstairs maid at the embassy. And finally, after about back and forth call at about 5 in the morning or so, 6 in the morning, 7, I got a call back from the Russian operator. "Mr. Khrushchev, no speak it English. You speak it with his interpreter." And I remembered that this was the very handsome young man that traveled with Khrushchev when he was banging his shoe on the podium, telling us we were going to die. And the interpreter kept translating it into palatable words for us to accept with our American ears. My father used to laugh and say, "Khrushchev didn't say what he's saying." Anyway, I said, "Yes, I'll speak to him." And he said, "Miss Lee, we're very happy to have you. Come, but we see your movies here all the time. We'd be delighted." And I said, "That's nice, but how do I get there?" And he said, "Well, why don't you talk to your congressman?" And I blew up and said, "Well, what in hell does my congressman have to do with traveling in your country? This is not a matter of politics. This is a matter of the heart. Please help me." Well, I must have pushed the right button with him, because he said, "Present yourself again to the Russian embassy in Washington in 30 minutes. And I thought, oh, hell, I'm getting the runaround again. Again, I'm going to get yet. This time, when I did call 30 minutes later, I was connected immediately to the first secretary. The first secretary happened to be Lithuanian, and I am fluent in Lithuanian, and I was able to communicate with him. And to cut this very long story short, 48 hours later, my mother and father and I and the State Department had told me, "Don't take your mother and father because they could be detained there as primary citizens of the Soviet." And I thought, no, God will not be that unkind. So I took my mother and father, and we were on a plane headed for Moscow and then heading back to Lithuania, where 6 months later, I went back by myself and brought my grandmother back here to the United States for the last 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days of her life.
Wow. I mean, looking back on your life, would you consider that call probably either the hardest or craziest or both thing you've ever done?
I look at it now and say it had to be the hardest, but it is not, because I was too young and too stupid to know how difficult and how impossible this was. But there's a point too that don't ever give up on whatever you are allowed to try. It just somehow works. So I say that to everybody who's listening today. You may think you have an impossible situation, but there's always a way. There is always a way to find an answer. Nothing is impossible.
It's true. And sometimes not knowing what you can't do, you know what I mean, allows you to do what you otherwise would have kept yourself from doing.
Makes you a lot braver. Exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. You know, I highly recommend anyone interested in your life, film history, and even our cultural history to pick up your book. I mean, you've got so many incredible stories. I mean, we just touched upon some of them here today, and I know that you're probably running tight on time, but I do want to touch on your new one-woman show. Please fill us all in. What is the show about, and where can our audience go see it?
Well, the audience, unfortunately, would have to see it in a club where I might be performing. Now, if you've got a great place you want me to come, invite me or ask the people to invite me that run the club. It's great. I travel with just my conductor and piano and then pick up the bass and the drums, wherever I am. I have played in Florida at the beautiful condos that you have, the villages, but that was a long time ago. So I'd like to come back again. And I know you are very, very prominent in that area, David. And so I look forward to coming back to Florida sometime or anywhere as far as that goes. I'm going to be playing in May here in Hollywood at the a wonderful place called the Vibrato, a gorgeous club. And I'm looking forward to that. Listen, at my age, to be able to get up and sing and walk and talk and chew gum at the same time is pretty damn good.
Ruta, you've truly led an incredible life. I mean, no interview could really ever do justice, just the sheer amount of knowledge and stories from Hollywood you could give us. But looking back, could you tell us kind of what achievement do you feel most proud of yourself personally in your life and career in show business?
I think that my best is not what I've done on the screen or the stage. I mean, there's nothing more wonderful in the world than having a standing ovation for your work and then a check at the end of the week. I mean, that's a pretty good combination, let's face it. But I think my work with Debbie, with her help originally and her tutelage and her guidance now spiritually, is probably the most important thing. I mean, I've done that for almost 60 years, and that's a long time to give. And I hope that it helps oil the slide if it doesn't take me into heaven. At least oils the hinges so the doors don't, the gates don't squeak when I have to see St. Peter. But I've dedicated my life to it. It's been worth it. I sometimes get very tired, but then all it takes is one person coming and tapping me on the shoulder and saying, "You don't know what you did for my son who was a druggie and went into all kinds of mental health problems, and the Thalians has helped." Well, I can't ask for a hell of a lot more. So I thank God for the privilege, and I thank God for the people that have supported me all through this. I've asked, I keep worrying that people cross the street when they see me coming because I'm going to ask them for money. Well, I usually do, but Debbie taught me this. She said, you can ask anything of anybody in this world, but don't ask it for yourself. Ask it for what your charity is. And she was right.
True, very true. Ruta, thank you so much for joining us. I mean, it's been an absolute pleasure.
David, thank you for the privilege of visiting with you and your polka dots. That's very special. Did my heart good. And love to all of your listeners and viewers. Thank you. Thank you for loving Dave the way I do. And hopefully we will meet again. Mwah.
That's our show for tonight. Thank you so much for watching. And a special thanks to actress Ruta Lee for joining us once again. Stay safe, everyone.